G'day everyone and welcome to this week's episode of On the Outer. I'm Tom and I'm joined by my continuing guest co-host, Luscious Lemons. How are you, Lemo?
I am very well. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me back for another week on the mic. I'm very excited to give some opinions about this round of AFL footy.
Excellent. Well, that's what we're here to do, so I'm glad to hear that. And can I ask what caught your watchful eye this week in the round 10 action?
Well, a couple of big upsets to finish the round I thought was particularly exciting. Hawthorn beating Brisbane down in Tassie, which nobody could have tipped. Only a genius would have tipped something like that to happen. We'll cover that later in the tipping show for the week. And then, of course, Collingwood beating Freo in Perth, which I don't think anybody could have foreseen at all. A couple of really big games. Another thing from the week was Carlton Footy Club beating Sydney on Friday night, really solidifying themselves as a legitimate contending team this year. And I guess this is a good opportunity while Gus is away to sing the praises of Carlton Football Club this week.
Well, yes, we will do that. We'll talk about all of that stuff. We're also going to continue our wildly popular segment from last week, Lemons, with the pub test. We'll get your take on a few of the different hot topic issues over the football world the last year or so. And we are going to do our reverse shine lights, which probably weren't as successful as last week if we're looking back through there. But look, there's always room for growth, and that's what we hope to do this episode. Of course, Lemons, if people want to check out us on YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast now, that would be great. You can have a look and subscribe, that button down there. Hit that button, have a look, make sure that you are following along so you don't miss a single episode. We are, of course, on Spotify and iTunes and all the rest of it as well. If you prefer the audio medium, you don't like looking at us, that's totally up to you. And if you do want to get in touch, hit us up at ontheouter1@gmail.com or Facebook, Twitter, something like that.
Sounds good.
All right, well, let's start with the big news of the week, which was Carlton's win over Sydney on Friday night. Going into the round, this was clearly the juiciest matchup and a really good fixturing decision to have this on Friday night by the AFL, so they've got that right for once. And look, I think very much a 50-50 contest going into the game. People weren't sure which way it would go, but in the end, Carlton clearly the better side. Again, they've had a bit of a lapse in the game and let the Swans back into it, and they seem to do that most weeks, but their best footy at their best is absolutely powerful, particularly in that second quarter. They just piled on the goals and they're pretty much unstoppable when they get in a bit of a roll like that. I know you watched some of it on a phone in a pub garden on Friday night with a very excited Carlton fan. And you would have witnessed just the flurry of goals they kick when they're on. They're really on.
Yeah, they're definitely, I guess, a team that I wouldn't have taken too seriously earlier in the year, but they've proven it now. Like, they've got so much talent. They've got players that keep going down, but they still are managing to next man up sort of mentality and carry the scoring. Like, Kerno kicking 6 goals was huge. I think 5 of them in the first half. Really, a match-winning performance, even though Sydney did come back into it a little bit later on. And then, just the play through the midfield, it's just really impressive. We talked about it a few weeks ago that they were good from stoppage, but they didn't really have another way to win. And I don't know if they've necessarily solved that problem and the ability to improvise, but they're 8-2 now. So maybe they're good enough from stoppage. It doesn't really matter if they can't figure out another way to win. They've got it. They're so good at that it's going to be enough for them.
Well, I mean, you're kind of right. They are incredibly good at it. Their scores from clearances, centre clearances over the course of the season are that far ahead of every other team. I think they're 3 or 4 times Brisbane, who's the second best in total scores from centre clearance this season. When you're that good at your one wood, maybe you don't need a 2 wood. They've all needed 2 wood against Melbourne, of course. But it's an amazing dominance what they've been able to do with that scores from clearance. And the second thing they're really good at is post clearance, which is really, really important. That basically, if you haven't heard the term before, it's like the next contest after the centre clearance. So it's all well and good. We see, guys like Darcy Parish, Tom Mitchell, these guys get a lot of centre clearances and they don't go anywhere. Whereas getting the ball out of the centre clearance and then winning the next contest is what really, really enables you to score a lot of the time. And they're second only to Melbourne in that as well. So if you think about the first two contested situations of any restart, of any after a goal or after quarter time or the start of a game, whatever, they're almost always winning the first two contests of that. It's no wonder that they're doing so well because they've got all these talked about a lot this week, but the footage of when the ball goes away from the clearance, they've got 3 Carlton players to 2 Sydney players. They've got 5 to 4. They've got 2 to 1. That's work rate, effort, and the way that they're set up, the way that Michael Voss has got them to set up around the ball means that they just almost always have an extra person at the footy, and you're going to win more often than you lose in those kind of situations as well.
Yeah. I guess on the other side of this is the Sydney Swans dropping another game to good competition. Do you reckon this is sort of do we have to look at Sydney maybe they're not in that upper group? I think earlier in the season, you and Gus both had Sydney as sort of second tier behind Melbourne and Brisbane. Do you think they're still there, or are they sort of dropping away sort of into the middle of the pack kind of area for you now, do you reckon?
A little bit. I mean, I guess they're still kind of, depends how the tiers have changed a little bit because now Carlton are level with Brisbane on win and loss. So you kind of got to take them seriously as being up there. I don't think many people would have them ahead of Brisbane or even level with Brisbane, but they're probably close to, whereas Sydney now seem to be, they're more in the mix with your Geelongs and, I think even St Kilda are probably ahead of them. We'll talk about Freo's situation soon. But, I think there's some concerns with the Swans. To be honest, I've never really considered them a premiership threat this year. I think they've got a great young team, and I think they will be a very, very good team in the next year or two. I just think it's a bit too early for them. So where we're seeing now is probably a bit of a levelling out. Huge game on Friday night versus Richmond. That now becomes, in fact, this is the closest game in AFL history in terms of there's never been a game with two teams because they're on the same amount of wins and their percentage points are separated by 0.019% or something. So this becomes a really, really important game because it will determine obviously who goes further up the ladder, but you're knocking off the other team who's right there with you and you're going, ahead of them in a significant way.
A double point.
So, yes, exactly. Yeah, classic. So, I think look, Sydney is still a very good team. I love what Sydney have done, no doubt about that. But, I do think they're dropped down a tier. I don't think they're in that real premiership mix, and they could still sneak into top 4, but I just think they're probably a little bit behind some of the stronger teams, and the Carlton has certainly shown that they're one of those. The other thing with Sydney that Josh Kennedy is now, he's got a 12-week hamstring injury, and there's only sort of 12 or 13 weeks of the season left. He hasn't been a huge player for them this year. He's been well past his best this season. He's playing in different roles, not having a huge impact. So it probably doesn't hurt them a lot from a game style point of view, but it probably does hurt them from a leadership point of view, and certainly from his point of view, that could be the last time he plays a game of football, which really sucks.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll look forward to Dustin Martin taking his position next season. So when he's running around at Sydney jersey.
All right, well done to the Blues. They play Collingwood in a Sunday afternoon 3:20 MCG fixture. So, it becomes a really interesting game with the Collingwood result last week. And look, Carlton will go in favourites, obviously, but it's never easy to win those big rivalry matches when both teams are up and about. So look forward to that one. Now, you mentioned off the top, Lemons, a few upsets to finish round 10. Certainly the round was travelling along pretty much by the book until these two matches, the last two of the round. Now, you famously tipped Hawthorn to beat Brisbane in this game. Would you like to give us a bit of an insight into what you were thinking then? Was this a total fluke, or did you actually have some kind of theory behind this?
I think I actually have achieved the ability to foretell the future. I've got legitimate prescience. So
wow.
It was an absolute fluke. I was just I didn't want you and my tips to be identical because you can't catch up with that. And I was just well, I figured Hawthorn were a chance because they were far away down in Tassie. I kind of mentioned on the TV show that like this might be a game that Brisbane like overlooks on the schedule, where they're like, going down to Tassie, playing Hawthorn in the cold, can't really be bothered. And like team, well, I mean, they rocked up and it was a good game, close result. I think Hawthorn only won by 5 points in the end. Yeah, 117 to 112. But they had a lot more fight than I guess anyone was expecting. I was as surprised as anyone, and I tipped Hawthorn to win. So it was a pretty good result.
Absolutely. Well, I think I remember you saying something along the lines of, and this may have been, retrofitting to come up with to back what you wanted to do, but Brisbane were maybe due a loss, and I think that is pretty reasonable. Like, this may have been a game that, that not that, like you said, not that they were willing to lose, because they want to lose, they want to win every game, but this is probably one that they thought, is a chance that they could drop, and coming off a really, really long run on the road. They've actually been travelling for 5 weeks. Like, some of it's been to Brisbane, but they've been on the road. They haven't had like a game home, a game away. They've been away 2-3 weeks at a time. So yeah, looking back, you can see why you pulled out such a genius prediction here, because it does seem like something that could have definitely happened, and it did. They're probably not concerned, the Lions. Like, they lost by 5 points. They've got a few players out now. Hugh McCluggage did his hamstring in this game, which is a bit of a blow. They're still missing Danaher. They're still missing McStay. It's fine. They're fine. I think this result says more about Hawthorn. Like, they've come back from, like, Brisbane got 20-something points up in the third quarter, which very much was fitting with the plan. Maybe you think Hawthorn are going to hang around for a while, and then Brisbane will get ahead and motor them away. But that didn't happen. Hawthorn came back really strong, and I thought they looked really good. I mean, I honestly think Hawthorn are... Look, I didn't expect them to be a good team this year. I thought they were bottom 4 for sure, but I recognised pretty quickly that they're a much better side than I thought they were. And I was very surprised to hear me say this so early in the season, but I think Sam Mitchell's really won me over. I think he's doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going through the stat sheets here, and they've pretty much played Brisbane even all over the park, which is not something you expect, with like the possessions and possession efficiency being like pretty similar. The only thing that really stands out is the Hawthorn efficiency inside 50 was 10% better, which I guess is in the end what made the difference for the scoreline. But really good signs for this Hawthorn footy club, which, yeah, as you mentioned, like, you had them tipped to be a cellar dweller, and they're not, and they've only really got upward improvement to come as well. So it's a really good sign for a team that's like trying to rebuild or retool on the fly, and doing a really good job of it right now.
Yeah, and look, they did get on a bit of a bad run over the last month or so, and people talked about how they've lost a lot of games after a hot start. But in that run, they played Melbourne, they played St Kilda, they played Sydney, they played Richmond. Like, these are teams that most people expect to play finals, and Hawthorn aren't there yet. So, yeah, they had a bad run. They had a tough draw. Now they've beaten Brisbane, they've beaten Geelong, and their draw is going to open up from here. I don't think they can play finals this year, but I think they're going to be, nipping at the heels and causing a few problems. So, yeah, it's a really good result. Other game, Lemons, which was a big surprise. I think this was probably even a bigger upset, was Fremantle versus Collingwood. Now, Freo coming off a shocker the week before against the Gold Coast Suns, in which they only kicked 4 goals. They've now backed it up with another, even argue an even worse performance, considering that this one was actually in Perth, and they've lost by 6 goals to Collingwood, again in the wet, and suddenly their credentials are looking very, very shaky.
Yeah, this one, I agree with you. This one was an absolute surprise, because you would have thought that after the round before, Fremantle had something to play for, had some pride on the line, and then I guess they can't kick goals in the wet weather. Is that sort of what we're looking at? Like, they're just kicking 6 goals in a game of footy at home against Collingwood, who were not exactly defensive juggernauts. That is a tough one to sort of you're not going to get too many wins kicking 44 points in that situation.
No, and look, 44 points in those kind of conditions, it's not good, but it's kind of average or a bit below average. Whereas Collingwood have managed to hit the conditions far better, and they've won by 6 goals. Like, it's a strange result. The only thing I can sort of think of with Freo is they play fast footy once they get the ball forward and once they take possession forward of centre, but they do play a pretty slow, grinding defensive game in the back half. They don't let teams get the ball. They don't let teams. They kind of try to, suffocate teams a bit in their back line to slow the game down, and then they get the burst forward to centre, and then they go. So maybe they haven't really adapted that to wet weather. You can't really possess the footy in wet weather. It's all about territory. So maybe that's something they need to look at. Obviously, not having Tabner there or Fife, some marking targets, that probably hurts. I know generally you get your goals in wet footy from your ground balls, but you still need someone to bring it to ground and to be able to create a contest, and they didn't have that on the weekend. It's a real rough spot for Freo now. It's not just an off game. This is a 2-week sample size of they've lost the same way. They've lost to teams who they would absolutely expect to beat, and both of them have been in poor conditions. So it's a real kind of solid indication that they're in a bit of a rut at the moment, and they're going to need to, they've probably got Melbourne this week, so it doesn't get any easier. They've got Brisbane the week after that, actually. So it could, if they don't, have a really good performance the next 2 games and pinch one, they could find themselves fighting for their spot in the 8 after such a awesome start to the year.
Yeah, well, currently they are 2 games clear of the Bulldogs, who are in 9th place. But, yeah, if losing 2 in a row here going to damage their percentage as well, I agree with you. It's scary. And, I sort of mentioned it about Sydney, whether you consider them dropping off a tier, Fremantle as well. They very briefly for me were in the elite tier, and now they're back sort of like you don't really know what to expect. Is this just a hiccup, do you reckon? Or like is there something really structural, like a real issue there?
Well, I think it's more likely to be something more significant than Sydney, because it's happened twice in a row now, and just their scoring in both games is so poor. I do recognise that, as I said, mentioned Matt Tabner, who's clearly their best forward. He's probably their only tall forward who's capable of kicking more than sort of 3 or 4 goals at any given game. So, yeah, obviously that's a significant factor. But, yeah, I would be concerned. I think they're going to really, really – I hope they don't rush Fife back, but I think they're going to really be keen to get him back now, because they were doing so well without him. And it was like, yeah, look at this. Look how good we're going. Imagine when you get Fife back. And now it becomes – the conversation turns into, oh, shit, we really need Fife back. So that'll be huge for them. But, yeah, I think they're now – yeah, if you assume that they're going to at least lose one of the next 2, you probably say both, but if they get one, they're still kind of back in the mix there, sort of 7th, 8th position fighting for that spot. So I think it's a disappointing downturn for them. Pies, on the other hand, looking good. They just, similar to Hawthorn, Collingwood and Hawthorn, just feels like they won't go away in this season. Like every time you think like, oh, no, they've had their go and now they're kind of back where we thought they'd be, they pull out an awesome performance. And after the Bulldogs game last week, I don't think anyone saw this coming from Collingwood at all. They're very, very hard to beat on their day.
Yep, and they're like just a game, the spot behind Western Bulldogs on the ladder, so they're only a game out of being in the finals. I still don't think you'd put any money on Collingwood playing finals this year, but they're there, and like you said, when they're playing well and when the stars are sort of doing things, when you've got Ginnivan running around being an absolute pest and kicking a couple of goals, they're a team with enough sort of ways of winning and good high quality players, even if some of them are a bit past their prime, like Pendles and like side bottom and stuff. They're still positive AFL players, and sometimes like if you get lucky with your role players playing a bit better, your star players or your old stars, having level-headed leadership, you go and you beat these teams. And, yeah, really, really good showing from the Pies over in Perth as well, which is never a fun place to play.
Yeah, they sort of got this thing, Collingwood, where they tend to kind of go on the road and have these really impressive wins when they're not expected to. Case in point, of course, being Elimination final a few years ago where they went to Perth completely expected to get blown away, and they ended up winning by a point. So, yeah, no, they got a bit of ticker about him. Craig McRae, I think, is he's doing a good job there as well. So a couple of the new coaches getting some good wins this week. In fact, all three that we talked about this week are the new coaches this season. Your man Spike McVeigh had a great win as well, actually, with the first game of the Giants, with Hurdy in the box next to him on the headset phone. So yeah, it's all happening there.
Great times.
All right, Lemons, we might move on to the segment we debuted last week to huge acclaim, and that is the pub test.
I love to have a beer with lemons. I love to have a beer with lemons. We drink in moderation, and we never, ever, ever get rolling drunk. We drink in the town and country, where the atmosphere is great. I love to have a beer with lemons, 'cause lemons is me, mate.
All right, mates, the pub test back from round 2. Hope you, are ready. Hope you're ready for some hot takes. We're going to start with a topic that gets thrown around every single year, and then every single year we end up with pretty much the same result on this. So I'm interested in your take from a fan of global sports and particularly US sports, to see if you have a different take on this. But it was announced this week that the grand final this year will be played at 2:30 p.m. instead of 4:30 or 7:30 or any of the other options that they canvassed. It seemed for all money that it was going to be at a twilight game, like a 4:40 or a 4:30 start. But instead, they've stuck with the traditional time slot. Wondering what your take on that is, if you have any view on your preference for the AFL Grand Final, or why you think they might have done that, or do you have any kind of view on, the comparison with, say, the Super Bowl, for example?
I think it's an interesting one that they would even think about moving it, like particularly after a couple of years of COVID-affected final series and things moving around. It kind of makes sense to me that they'd be like, all right, let's go back traditional. Let's give the people sort of what they used to, maybe have, up to 100,000 people at the MCG on a Saturday afternoon. Like that's sort of what the grand final has and always has been, apart from the last couple of years, as long as I've been following footy. In terms of like it being that locked into that time slot in that location every year is kind of an unfair advantage for the Melbourne-based teams. Like if we're talking literally just about the grand final always gets played at the MCG, and I don't think anyone's questioning that. But the idea of moving it to a different location, I mean, I'm sure all the Perth fans loved it last year and they had a great time, but it was half as many people got to go as if it was in Melbourne, and that's a big factor. It's tough to weigh up the tradition versus like the fairness of the competition. And I guess like maybe they could mix it up a little bit sometimes, and like every couple of years or every 3 or 4 years have a interstate grand final, but like announce it before the season sort of starts, sort of like the Super Bowl in America where they move it, like they announce it at the start of every year. But yeah, I'm happy with it being back at a traditional time this year. I think the Melbourne fans deserve it.
Yeah, good. I think that's basically the reason why they did it, was because clearly for their broadcasters' point of view, there's pressure to put it in the evening, but most fans don't want that, certainly not yet. We want to have a year of normality before we look at other options as well. So,
yeah. I mean, it's a public holiday beforehand as well. Why do they like it?
Yeah.
I don't know why it makes too much difference whether it's Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening from a broadcast perspective. But
I don't either, but apparently it does. They get real antsy about it. I'm sure they get Channel 7 do very well with the ratings for the AFL Grand Final. I don't think they need to be too concerned about that. All right, so you're siding with the masses on that one.
Yep.
Now, this one's an interesting one. I'm sure you've been keeping up through the season with the increased or lack of tolerance towards umpire dissent, and the way that 50 metres have been paid for remonstrating with the umpires. Has sort of gone beyond remonstrating now. It's sort of just your basic kind of like any kind of like split second issue that you might have displayed in a body language way is usually resulting in a 50-metre penalty. We saw some we saw some pretty bad umpiring decisions on the weekend, and it's since been revealed that 14 umpires are out of action with COVID. So they're like West Coast. They've had to go back to like guys who really probably aren't quite there yet. And so that was a result of a lot of free kicks. But I'm wondering if you've seen some of the ones this week and over the course of the season in general, if you have a take on whether, you think umpires should be able to pay free kicks or 50-metre penalties for dissent, and what level do you think it should go to?
Yeah, I saw comments from Cooney this week talking about how it's ruined the game and made it made it impossible to watch. Completely disagree with that. I feel like maybe they've gone a little hard line with this first year of changes, and it's like a little bit of an overcorrection in terms of how quickly the 50-metre penalties are being paid. But at the same time, they almost had to do it, and the players adjusted like really, really quickly. Like it's only happening with the complaining and getting 50-metre penalties. That's only happening like once or twice a game, if that, like, or just 10 rounds into the season. So I think it makes a lot of sense that they brought in these rules, considering they couldn't retain umpires all through like every level of AFL football, like right down to juniors and stuff. And whilst I get the white line fever when I'm playing any sports. So like I am tempted to debate my point with umpires quite frequently. I think it is a good thing for the game in general, because like you want to be, like you've just said, this round they had next like lower level umpires, and it resulted in the game being officiated worse. Like that's the most common sense thing you could think in the world. So in order to encourage better umpires and retaining better umpires, having them be looked after, and this being a simple rule, I'm totally for it. And the guys playing the game are professionals. Like if they can't adjust to not complaining after every call, it's fine. It's like I'd like them to bring it in like the NBA, which I watch quite a lot. They complain after every single call, and it's just like that is painful to watch. I'd way rather like the referees just be able to tell them, "Nah, shut the fuck up, let's go." And that makes the game run a lot smoother. Yeah,
look, I think that everyone gets very upset when new rules come in because it takes a while to people get used to them, but they're not meant to be perfect straight away. Like it takes time. And yeah, I think the thing that people aren't talking about when they criticize this new rule is that they're not taking into consideration how bad it must have been to get to the point where they feel like they need to do this, where the AFL feels like they need to do this. Like obviously things got pretty bad and people weren't discussing it then because it wasn't affecting the players. It was just part of the game, or the umpires don't have a voice, don't have a platform, so it's not really discussed. Like how bad it was changed for a reason. It's not just because they want to give more 50-metre penalties away and they want to annoy the fans, or as Mark Robinson wrote yesterday, that the AFL is being infiltrated by the woke world. It's the dumbest take I've ever heard in my life. Thinks that like people like want to be kind to each other more often now that umpires, they're getting able to pay 50s for being shouted at like stupid idiot. Anyway, it got to that position for the position got so bad that they needed to make that change for a very good reason. And no one ever talks about that. Everyone ever talks about how it's just annoying it is now. Like, yeah, it's pretty annoying, but it won't be annoying forever, and we'll all be better off for it. So,
yeah,
anyway. All right. We'll leave the hard stuff there, Lemons. I just thought we'd finish off with this one. This isn't really the pub test, but given we are in Sir Doug Nicholls' rounds last week and next week coming up, was wondering if you had a favourite Indigenous player in your time watching the game, or a couple that you'd like to acknowledge.
Well, freshly retired Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody would have to be one of my favourite players of the last, however long, decade or so. One of the few reasons that I've enjoyed watching the Essendon Football Club for most of those years. Historically, favourite players, I'm not sure exactly who I would have as my top one. I reckon I had a bit of a soft spot for Dean Rioli, playing in the Essendon side in those sort of like early 2000s, late 90s. Can't remember exactly when his career spanned, but I got a soft spot for, a guy who's maybe got a few extra kilos running around, but still being a very effective elite football player. And that was definitely something that Dean Rioli was known for. Otherwise, just tons of great AFL players over the years, but they're the two that come to mind initially. How about yourself? What do you reckon?
Yeah. I think it's got to be Buddy for me. Like I did say when he kicked his 1,000th earlier this season, he probably is my favourite player. Like, I think he's probably the best player that I've seen, and I reckon he's probably my favourite. And he's just the longevity of his ability. Like, he's 34 now, or whatever, and he's kicked 1,000 goals, and he's still the player that you come to watch. And he's still, he's only a few weeks ago kicked 6 goals. Like, he's still an absolute star, and he has been every single season since he started playing for Hawthorn back in 2005. Like, he's just an absolute machine, and it goes against everything about modern footy, how good he is. So, and just his highlight reel. Like, it's just, if you're ever bored one night, chuck on Lance Franklin best 10 goals, and they're just ridiculous. Like,
the snaps from the pocket fully on the run. Stuff
stuff like that. Goals on the run from like 70 meters out and stuff, like where he's dodged a bunch of players, and he's unreal. So Buddy for me. But of like Richmond players, I think Shea Bolton, he's my favourite current player, and a huge amount of love for Shea, and I think he's going to probably end up being one of the really, really great Indigenous footballers. So, so Doug Nicholls round, of course, continues next week, round 11. So they do it so each club gets a home game, so they can wear their, Indigenous strip in front of their home crowd and have the players, acknowledged in that way. So, they'll continue this week, which is always good stuff.
All right. Well, Tom, let's move on to the final segment of the show. We're going to do Reverse Shine a Light. All right, Tom, Reverse Shine a Light. Let's do a little score check from last week. Who did you have? So
I had old Green Sheets Answorth from Brisbane. Yeah. Look, I thought he might be a chance to, get a bit of the outside footy against the Hawks, but obviously the Hawks were too good for the Lions on the day, and poor old Answorth didn't really get involved much in that game. So, unfortunately, I don't think I registered a point last week.
No. And do you remember who Gussie had last week?
Yeah, he had Bramble from the same game, Lachlan Bramble. Similar story, I think. He didn't get a whole lot of the ball, but look, he played his role, but I don't think quite enough to get him over the line.
And my man Sean Lemons, Horny Shawnee Lemons, he did not get a point either. 13 possessions. Fine. He's doing his job, but nothing too exciting. All right. Well, let's look forward to next week then, Tom. Who have you got lined up? Green Sheets Answorth again, or are we got
well, close, because I've gone straight from Answorth to.
Ooh.
You know who that is?
No.
Ainsworth. That's Ben Ainsworth from the Gold Coast Suns.
Beautiful.
Now he's a good player. Probably hasn't quite gone on with his career. He's a high draft pick, and he just has these periods where you think he's going to really, really turn into the star that he looked like becoming when he was a junior. He never quite does it, but I think that he's still a good contributor. And with Hawthorn, don't have a ruckman this week, so I'm thinking Jared Witts is going to. I think Gold Coast are going to get a lot of shots at goal. I'm not sure that they'll win, but they're going to get a lot of shots at goal because Jared Witts is just going to be pumping it in there all day, and Ainsworth might get on the end of a few. Who's Gus got?
Gus has gone with, give me 1 second, Levi Casbolt. Which is a pretty interesting choice from old Gussie. So he's playing. Where is Levi Casbolt? We were talking about.
These are the Suns. So we're all got Suns. We're all Suns players this week. Yeah.
So Levi.
We're all hoping that they can feast on the Hawks.
He snagged a few goals last week. How did he go this week? Do you know? I'll have a look.
Didn't notice him a whole lot.
Yeah, I can't remember his name coming up too much, but he kicked 3 behinds and had 7 disposals. So he's got a good jumping off point for Gussie there, because I feel like he has a bounce back week against Hawthorn this week and really gets a hold of him, kicks a few goals. He should be locked in there for a point. Whereas my man, Sean Lemons, I'll go with him again this week and have hopefully Gold Coast Suns absolutely tear Hawthorn to shreds, and all three of us can get a point again. That'll be fun.
Well, yeah, all eyes will be on the Gold Coast Suns Hawthorn game, which is actually up in Darwin this week. So, yeah, everyone tune into that to see how our boys go, Casbolt, Lemons and Ainsworth. All right, Lemons, thank you for joining us once again. That is all we have time for on the Outer this week, but we will be back with our tipping show on Thursday. Some really sort of interesting games this week. So if you are doing your tips, the pub or at work or wherever you do it at home, tune in and have a look and get our takes and our justifications, because we're absolutely flying with our tips at the moment, and we're regularly pumping out 9s, as you would have seen if you'd been watching it. So tune into that. And, of course, as I said at the start, we would appreciate a little bit of a follow or a subscribe on wherever you're watching this. Just jump on and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single minute of On the Outer for the rest of the season. Lemons, thanks again, and we will catch you next time. Ciao.
Ciao.